Trish Bodie,
Here.
Gloria Gonzalez de Lucia,
Here.
Anna Smith,
Here.
Sade Fashokun,
Here.
Paul Gauthier, Christine Maurer,
Here.
Francesca Romans.
Here. All right, it is 6:16 p.m. It's a special meeting of the Board of Trustees. I now call a quorum and the meeting to order. We will proceed with the next item on our agenda. Since this is a special meeting, we do not have our regular agenda items on here, so there is not a moment of silence or a pledge of allegiance, but we'll be moving next to our citizen comments. We have one speaker signed up this evening, and I will, since this is a special meeting, I will just remind our speakers and our audience online that we have processes and policies and procedures. When you speak before the board, you can find those at BED Local. And without further ado, first speaker, you are up.
Thank you. I've taken the time to go through the 42 slides in the training tonight, and I just wanted to give you some brief feedback from the perspective of a parent going through them. At the beginning of the briefing, in a short 90-second feedback, your governance core slide describes you guys as a cohesive, unified team with a common vision driven by a shared moral imperative. My question to challenge you guys tonight is, what happens when that moral imperative is in conflict with the parents? On the next slide, you describe the unity of purpose, common focus, and core values and beliefs as a governance team's members share in common. Once again, what happens when those core values and beliefs are in conflict with members of the community? Finally, at the end, or the next slide, is a slide that talks about the core beliefs, and it's got several bullets. I want to focus in on bullet number 3, where it says, our Leander ISD family, which includes our students and their families, life changers, board, community members, thrives when we treat one another with integrity, respect, fairness, and acceptance while appreciating our differences. My final comment to you guys is, I've seen some of your public comments on social media, and is that really true? 90-second parent input. Thank you.
All right, thank you, speaker number 1. And that concludes our citizen comments. We'll be moving on to the next agenda item, and our really only agenda item this evening. We're here this evening. It is a required training. It is called EISO training. If you want that out, it's on our agenda. It's the actual word for it is evaluating and improving student outcomes. Without further ado, we'll go ahead and have, I guess, several people be presenting, but I think Laura Lynn, you're kicking us off.
Yes, ma'am. We're all
Okay.
on.
Oh, okay. Then everybody come on up.
Oh, it's good timing. I thought I was solo. It's going to be Sarah to the power of 1. All right. I have to make my chair a little taller. Good evening, Madam President, Board of Trustees, and Dr. Gearing. We are here tonight, as Ms. Bodie said, to go through the required Senate Bill 1566 training titled Evaluating and Improving Student Outcomes. And if you have been on the board for a little while, you have gotten to experience this training either with myself or with Dr. Matt Smith, who was here previously. And as we got ready to do this year's training, I sat down and really thought about the work that the board has done over the last 2 years, when you were working on your core beliefs and your mission and your vision and everything that it meant to be a board member here in Leander ISD. But it really hit home for me back in December when you had your board retreat and Sarah was leading you through this, and I sat there and went, every single thing that she's doing is connected right with evaluating and improving student outcomes. So I came back and talked to Brenda, who was going to be leading this training with me, and I said, I have an idea. What if we take both of these things that the board is already doing and put them together as part of this? And I think what you'll see tonight is that it is a true testament to your work as a board. Everything you have been doing is what is required of you. So I would applaud you right away for going above and beyond. I don't think you need to be told by TEA what to do. You're doing the right work every single day. And so I just thank you for that, and just wanted to let you know that's why tonight might look a little different than any previous EISO training, and why there's a whole team up here. I brought all my friends tonight. So Yes. So we're here tonight. Again, you can see everything on there, and there really are three main parts to this training. The first one is what Sarah and Sarah are going to lead you through when we look at board behaviors and what it is you do and you believe as a board that's connected to student outcomes. Brenda's then going to talk to us about state accountability and TEKS, and then we're going to really look at how you as a board can adopt some progress monitoring practices so that you're focusing on all of the student groups. In particular, TEA says that we need to look specifically at students with disabilities and emergent bilingual. So that's what we'll be focusing on tonight. So we're kind of combining all of the work you've been doing and putting it right in with the evaluating and improving student outcomes training. So hopefully this will meet all of your needs and all of the stuff. So thank you. I'm going to pass it over to my Sarah's friends down there.
All right, good evening. We are excited to be with you tonight. As Laura Lynn talked about, definitely building upon the work that we started in December. So if you recall, and we spent a good chunk of time really diving into the governance core and to I pulled back out this slide. What does it mean to be a cohesive, unified team? And we spent a lot of time talking about norms, how do we want to treat each other, and how do we come together as a team to do this important work. If you recall from that, we talked a lot about the moral imperative in our sweet little faces. So these are pre-K students in our system right now. And as we think about the moral imperative, this is at the root of our moral imperative, right? Of ensuring positive outcomes for every student in our system, maximizing their potential, unleashing their potential, as y'all have talked about. So we talked a lot about how do we come together to live out this moral imperative, and how do we treat each other in this important work, right? So we didn't get to finish our conversations, and we said we were going to pick those back up. And so we're going to carry on. And part of our time together is going to be digging not only into the governance core a little bit more, but also this incredible work, like Laura Lynn talked about, that you all have been engaged in. We have 2 new board members who joined our team, and so wanting to just go back over our work, make connections, and make sure that all voices are able to be a part of this as we continue our work forward, again, thinking about those sweet baby faces. Okay, so as we had talked about a moral imperative, the next piece in the governance core does talk about unity of purpose. And what I love about this, as we were pulling this out, it talks about, as a common focus, superordinate goals, which definitely we have those, and the core values and beliefs governance team members share in common about children. And as we were digging into it and preparing for our work with the board, this came to mind. Shared core beliefs that drive the work, that help to transcend differences to fulfill a greater purpose. So I know we always have a laminated copy out on the tables for you, but this time we have a paper one because we are going to interact with it just a little bit. So if you will find your paper copy. And I am going to ask for any of our board members who were with us when the core beliefs were developed, if you could share about the process that we went through, from what you remember, gosh, that was a couple of years ago now, what was that process that we went through to develop these, just so that we can catch up our board members? So I'm going to pause and see who wants to jump in on that.
Yeah, so I'll jump in. Anna and I were brand new, and that was really interesting because some of the framework was already done, but it wasn't quite finished. And so it was interesting to be able to kind of walk in on some of the, I would say, I guess the best way to describe it is a skeleton. Like there was a skeleton built, but maybe not all of the muscles and bones and things like that. Not everything was put together yet. And so being able to include our voices in that was really interesting. And I remember us, we would, like, to use one of Trisha's terms, we would noodle on certain phrases and really think about it. And does it make sense? And this is what we want. And does this serve everyone, right? That was the main thing that I think both of us kind of came in with a kind of a different perspective of making sure that everyone in our system is seen, staff, students, everyone. And so I think all of the words here were selected very, very carefully. And they have a lot of work behind them. They have a lot of meaning behind them. It wasn't just sentences on a paper. I feel like these core beliefs, and we've come back to these when we've had to make hard decisions. And so that was the whole goal, I think, is going into it with, is this something we can lean on? And I think that was one of the things that stuck with me the most is we want these items that we're going to talk about, at the base of everything, when things get hard, can we lean on this? And I think that's what stuck with me, is that's why the words were so important, if that makes sense.
Anyone want to build upon that?
Well, I think Chris did a perfect job. I would echo some maybe behind the scenes before they got here, is we had the hopes and dreams conversation, because we talked about, I think in citizen comments, where is your parent community input? The hopes and dreams conversation was happening at the same time. So we're hearing from community parents of, this is what we want to see in our district. This is what we want to see in our students. And so that conversation was building at the same time we started working on this. And we did have several iterations of it, where we were up on the wall talking about all the different things. And we had tons of things that we thought of core beliefs. And I think in our book, The Governance Core Moral Purpose, they talk about every student can learn. Well, yes, we said that's great, but can we do a little more? And so I think core beliefs was us expanding and teasing some of that out, taking what the community had told us, taking as a board things that we thought were really important key factors when we are having like discussion and deliberation on certain agenda items. Are we staying true to our core beliefs on those things? And yes, the conversation got even richer when Anna and Chris are able to join and kind of add input too. So I think this is definitely a work with a lot of discussion that happened on this.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And so if you recall that actually it did start with our hopes and dreams, and then also having you identify, when you think about having to make hard decisions, what are those core beliefs you individually lean into? And then we went through a process to identify what's the collective core beliefs that the team can get behind, because it is a team of 8, right? And so went through and I appreciate just that focus on the right words to make sure it captures really what is that we're going to lean on in these hard times. So I think it's important that we go back to those and spend just a little bit of time, especially having a new board member with us tonight, to really dig into that. So what we're going to ask you to do is you have a highlighter, and I want you to take the highlighter, and I want you to highlight what resonates with you. Unlimited. If it is the whole thing, that is fine. This is more about you interacting with the document and really thinking back on those words. So highlighting what resonates with you. You didn't highlight all of the these, right? All the articles, right? Okay, so now I want you to take a pen, or if you wanted to do the highlighter, that's fine. And I want you to circle or underline things that maybe you're wondering about as you read back over. As you read,
Circle or underline, whichever you prefer.
yeah,
Things
whatever
that you're wondering about.
you're wondering, as you read back over those statements, things that you're wondering about. Okay, like I said, we wanted to have some intentional time to interact with these core beliefs. Not everyone was here when these were first drafted. And so it is important that we just constantly come back to this and make meaning of these and make sure that we're all still aligned around this. So just we wanted to open up the conversation and let you all have a conversation together about maybe things that resonate with you, that you highlighted, or things that you're wondering about, and just allow the board to have that conversation.
I have a question. As I was going through this with more intention, it appears to map to each of the goals of the strategic plan. Was that intentional? What? Okay. Just wanted to make sure.
Recently at a leadership TASB conference, we were talking about our core beliefs and our vision and our mission statement. And we all brought up, ours, and we're looking at them and asking the question of what's missing, or like, what are the things that really strike you? And that specific day, we had a couple of different professors come and speak to us about, and they were all professors or deans in schools of education that are, training students to be teachers. And then we also had, of course, someone from TASB there talking to us about the current state of education and educators leaving. And we're asking, where in your beliefs or in your mission are you really empowered? How are you supporting your staff and your teachers? And so I looked at ours and I was all proud. I was like, well, we do have something about that in ours. But then there was a lot of questions from other people. And they were like, okay, well, when you say that you're empowering them, what does that really mean? What does that look like? What does that look like given the climate of Texas, of public education right now? How are you really supporting your teachers and staff? And, we had a lot of conversations about, I think everyone here would know this, but there's not many industries that you go into where every person thinks that they're an expert in it, right? You don't go to your dentist's office or sometimes maybe you do go to your doctor's office and be like, no, I was watching Grey's Anatomy and I saw this, or I read WebMD and I know all the solutions. But, in this situation where mostly everyone has been in a public school, right? Most people have been in a school. So you do come with that background knowledge, right, of how you were educated and things like that. So talking a lot about how do we support our staff and our educators, these are professionals who have spent, their livelihood becoming experts in this area. How do you support them to do the work? How do you really empower them to do that work? Because when are we empowering them, and when are we holding them back from inspiring our students? And I've been thinking about that a lot, because they asked me all these questions, and I was like, I don't know, but it looks really pretty right here. And I was like, I don't know. I mean, and I have been wanting to have that question. What does that mean to us? What does that look like? What does that look like right now? How do we really support our teachers?
I think we saw an example of that with the 4 points presentation, where
I love that.
Yeah, where Mr. Lutz, had his personal passion and was able to translate that and was allowed to bring that in. So that's one example that, because we just saw it, it's kind of fresh in my mind.
Yeah, that's a great example. Thank you.
Well, Gloria, I like you, that the life changers, empowered, right, inspire our students and own their learning are ones that I highlighted. Those are the words that I highlighted in that statement. And I think I know where you're coming from, and I think it's important for us as a board to be sure that we, when we have teachers come up in citizen comments and we have teachers give us feedback, that we don't just let those be words. I mean, they're telling us what they need. And so by telling us what they need, how can we then, whether it be in policy or procedure or whatever, how do we show that support for everyone? And so that was one of those are the words I highlighted there. And then the top one, the words I chose were, every student is at the heart of our decisions. And so to me, those words means every single student. And I think that sometimes we get lost in some of the noise when we're not considering every single student, no matter what baggage they bring to school, right? Some come hungry, some come tired, some come from a really tough place, some come from a great place. But how are we supporting every single one of them? And so that's our job. It's our job as public education educators and a system is to support all of them. And so for me, those are the things that stuck out in the first two.
Just to piggyback off of what Chris said, a focus on students and all elements that impact their overall student experience. I know one thing that I hear a lot, I do the carpool for the high school, and one thing that I hear a lot is everybody's talking about us. Everybody's screaming about us. Nobody will talk to us. We're trying to tell people what we need. We're trying to tell people what's going on, and nobody's listening because they're all too busy yelling at each other to pay attention to all the students in the middle. And that's just immediately what came to my mind. Like, that is an element that impacts their education. What happens in here, the climate in this room, matters to them. They do listen, whether we think they are or not. They're listening to that. They're paying attention. And I think it's sometimes difficult when they're trying to have their voices heard more. Like the superintendent's student advisory committee, I talk about them all the time because it was an incredible presentation. And I wish that those voices would sometimes take precedence over the rest of us, because they're the ones in the rooms every single day doing all the work with our teachers. And that is what came to my mind initially.
And I don't know if I'm doing my active listening well, so I'm hoping you will correct me. But I'm hearing some discussion. It sounds like a lot of that discussion on communication. How do we get the communication back from the students? How do we know we're listening? How do we get the communication back from teachers, staff, and know that we are listening to the extent that we can in a board role, because we're not day to day too. I think I'm summarizing some of the things. I think I want to go back earlier to Gloria's statement about empowering staff, and I'm just curious in those discussions, were there any measurements? I mean, even when I say this, I'm like, I don't know how you do it. And the whole happens, and so let me just go ahead and tell you the and get it out there, which is, EISO, originally TEA said, look, if y'all focus on STAR, that'll complete your training, we're good, we're done. And we said, we don't think that's enough. We want to focus on not only our STAR scores, we want to know about our MAP, our iStation, like what's the whole child learning? Let's keep putting that in there. Let's talk about all the other things that are going on with learning. And I get it, it's hard to put those measurements in place. But from a board level, since that's somewhat of what we get is kind of like measurements or vision or direction, was there any answer, Gloria, on how to do that when you're not administration that was readily apparent in your discussions?
It was more, I hate to say answers, right? But there was a lot of discussion, and I felt like a lot of ideas about what that means and what that looks like. Empowered. I think one of the things we came back to was making sure as a board, as a team of 8, that it's clear to our staff, to our life changers, that overall in our position, we are here to support them and to make sure that that is our priority, to make sure that they have the resources they need so they can do number one here, right? And inspire our students for their, to own their learning. They said a lot of our discussion came back to it's the discussions we have up here and how we're speaking to and about the work that they're doing, because they're listening. Probably we know, yes, that students and parents are listening, but the majority of the people, right, when they do these analysis on who's watching your board meetings, the vast highest percent majority is your staff that are watching. And because this directly impacts them day to day, right? And are they going to be able to do their work? Are they not? And so we talked a lot about how we show up here and how the decisions we make and the discussions we have, how we're positioning our staff in those.
All right, so I'm going to go back a couple of slides. So we've talked about moral imperative, and that notion of each and every student. And we've talked about the core beliefs and those powerful statements that, and again, I love this, that help transcend beyond differences to fulfill a greater purpose, right? And you've already talked about how much we lean on these when we have to make hard decisions. That's why we wanted just to spend some time to go back to that, make sure this still resonates, and it's still what we want to lean upon. That's what I'm hearing here tonight in this discussion, right? And as we think about evaluating student outcomes, right, it does come back to what is mentioned in here. Okay. So we went through all of that work, developed the core beliefs. You did a monumental task with that, and it's beautiful. And then we moved into, from there, this is like a history lesson, right? And then we moved into developing the vision statement and the mission statement. And so, for those that were not here at that time, we're going to ask for other board members to talk about what's the process that we went through with this.
So I was on the committee with another board member. We were thrown right into the mix for the vision part. And I think what I loved about it is that we got into a room with Sarah and it was just talk it out. We took everything that the board had talked about in the board retreat and went back and forth, and you can imagine the conversation was very back and forth, but it was good conversation. And I think the cool part of it is when we brought it back to the board and had that open discussion and cultivate kept being the word of the night. And how we all got into our own little groups. My group drew a really cool tree with bees on it, just so y'all remember. But the cool part about it, I think, and what I enjoyed was when we were crafting this message, all 7 of us from all different walks of life, different opinions, all came together to cultivate this beautiful vision message. And it truly, I felt like a true team of 8 job. And it kind of like, I guess, got me like a first experience into, oh, this is what good governance is. This is what's going to help drive us. And so I will say, though, I remember listening into the Students Advisory Council feedback. And I remember going to that next meeting and I was like, we have to start over. We're not doing this right at all. They're like, what is this hashtag stuff? Like, they had no idea what hashtag Leander ISD was. And I thought it was the coolest thing ever. Like, I was happy. But I remember in that moment being like, I need to bring it back down a level. Like what you were saying earlier, Francesca, at the end of the day, the decisions we make in this room affect those students and they want to have a voice. And it really made me kind of wipe out my own, like what I thought we needed, but more into these are what the kids need. We need to be listening to our students. And that, I think after that meeting and listening to their very, very great feedback, really kind of brought me back down as an individual and as a parent and as a trustee, like we are here for the kids. And so I really enjoyed this whole vision mission process. Y'all know that.
So on the mission statement, if you recall in that, we actually had cabinet members come up and engage in a process. So in the board meeting, we were in circles and really talking about what is it that is going to help us drive and actually meet that live out that vision. So we were in small pockets, and then again, same process of taking all of that feedback. What were the themes that we were hearing from these discussions, and we were focusing in on when have we gotten it right for students and for staff and for families, and building on those themes. And then we had again a small group that took all of those themes and crafted the mission. And you can see such that thread that goes all the way through from core beliefs, vision, and mission, right? That individual student, that each and every, knowing and appreciating them, creating that safe and supportive environment to nurture their personal growth, right? That each individual, and partnering with each family, because they're integral to this process and to helping to support our students.
So I just want to take you on a little wander down memory lane here, because for some of you, you were here every step of the way and others came in at different points, but I think this really does help see both the intentionality and the organic nature of the work that this board has been engaged in over the last 3 years. So this takes us back to October of 2019. Interestingly, the word COVID didn't exist. And we began a process where we knew we were dissatisfied with the state accountability A through F system of assigning, bubbling up everything about a particular campus or the district into a single letter. But we really weren't exactly sure what to do about that. And so we began some discernment process, and we began thinking about this idea of what if we built a system that was built on the hopes and dreams of the community that we're serving. And what could that look like if we were holding ourselves accountable to those things rather than what we felt was somewhat arbitrary with that A through F system? And so we began that December having some special education symposiums, and then in February started our community conversations around hopes and dreams. So if you remember, we did this at feeder patterns at high schools and had thousands of people participate with us. In addition, using the thought exchange tool, we gathered everything we could about hopes and dreams and began to discern and synthesize that down to what is it that we're being called to do. And about that same time, we were having lots of the beginnings of some equity conversations, and we had a couple of community meetings related to access and equity. So that was March 2020. And that was literally days before everything changed in all of our worlds. So that actually did not stop us. And this board's tenacity and perseverance and just ability to keep the main thing is really demonstrated in this little journey we're taking today. And other districts that we have presented this to, we have presented this timeline to TPAC, were amazed that we did this during COVID and we were able to accomplish so much and so powerfully. So that summer, we started the work that Sarah just described, the core beliefs, the mission and the vision development that you all were just all in on. And then we started with our graduate profile redesign. So that took us through most of the 2020-2021 school year. Again, thousands of community members, of people engaged in that process where they had a voice and they helped us understand what is our North Star and then how does that relate to our vision, our mission, and our core values. So I think Sade, you noted that there might be some alignment in that work that was done. And so it was pretty easy for this board to establish those priority goal areas that then launched us into this strategic planning process. And so by September of 21, we realized that perhaps people's lives had changed just a little bit from those original hopes and dreams conversations. So we redid some virtually, did some member checking and determined where we wanted to make sure that we were holding true to the values of our community. And then we really launched that September our strategic planning process. So we've developed our strategic plan. By last May, we were able to really align our DIPS and SIP processes so that our this year's SIPs and DIPS that you all just recently approved are directly aligned to that whole strategic planning, which you can pull the thread all the way back to those core values that you guys have talked about. And so our work here has been from that point forward was how do we now then get the board calendar aligned so that the work that you're doing, the things that you're spending your time on are directly aligned to the things that you all have said are most important. And then we align the superintendent evaluation to that same process, and we created our inaugural baseline CBAS report, our community-based accountability report. So this year we have been experimenting with you. I wish I could tell you that all of this was perfectly planned and happened in exactly the way we thought it would, but it wasn't. It happened the way it needed to happen, and it happened because this board was willing to sit down and have the hard conversations and be able to continue to push back on us and for us to create what has been created and really do that together. This year we have aligned our work with you all with leading measures, with formative reviews all around that DIP, which is the strategic plan. And now you'll see our school improvement visits and other site-based teams that are all fully aligned. And so when we realized that this was a conversation around how are you going to monitor the progress of students, you all have already laid that framework in such a powerful way to do this in a way that goes so much beyond what our state assessment could do, so much beyond what an accountability system that's imposed upon us could do, because we're creating that ourselves and we're building it together. So you all have all seen the strategic plan by now, and that really was the culmination of a lot of this work. And yes, we have 5 goal areas, which by now, I'm wondering if you guys can do them in your head. I suspect you probably can. If not, by the end of the year, you will be able to. Initially, that was hard for us, but now they just roll right off. So just to orient you, the intentionality of that strategic plan that you have before us, because we were really marrying that community-based accountability process, how we're monitoring and holding ourselves accountable to what we knew were the hopes and dreams and the core values. And we tried to marry that process. And so you can see that there is a lot of intentionality with the way this is laid out. So we have the goal areas that were approved by the board, the goal statements that were developed by the community. So the community, those teams, took what you all said was the area that needed to be worked on, and they fleshed that out. And boy, did that go through some processes. We were passing from team to team and getting feedback until it was amazing. But what we ended up with is a really cool articulation of what our community, what we mean by those goals, and what is the impact to the student that we hope to achieve. So we have built our whole system on benefits that we want to be giving to our students and the promise that we're making to our community. We then took it a little further, and we had those teams develop those high yield strategies, actually the order it went was they developed what are the questions we need to be asking ourselves to be able to know if we're doing these things, what evidence would be appropriate. And so again, you're gonna see that in your leading measures conversation, you're gonna see that in the DIP, we're gonna see that all the way through the community-based accountability system, straight from the community that engaged with us to develop this. Can you do this part? I think this is you.
All right, so I do want to just highlight again, thank you, Sarah, the incredible work and foresight that this board has had, because all of this has laid the incredible foundation for really transforming our district. As we think about the vision, the mission, the core beliefs, that graduate profile, this strategic plan, and making sure that we are holding ourselves accountable to this work. This is what we have heard from our community is most important, what we want to see in our system. So how do we ensure that we are holding ourselves accountable to that? And so there's been a lot of intentionality behind that. The formative reviews, the leading measures updates that we're constantly talking about it. So there is no question if we are making progress on these efforts. So as we think about the very first objective with this training is to discuss school board behaviors correlated with improved student outcomes. So we're going to kind of dig into that just a little bit more as it relates to all of this work, right? We needed to spend some time kind of going back and thinking about all of this because it's, as Sarah said, it's beyond just the state accountability. There are things in our district that we have said we're holding ourselves accountable to. And so we want to make sure we're thinking about all of those pieces. So back in the spring, we introduced to you the notion of a theory of action. And we talked about, this is work that we've been engaging with our principals around, that you start over on the far right. So what is it that you want to see in your classrooms? What is it that you want to see students doing? And so we have here, students will be able to learn at high levels, right? So then you backwards map that. So if that's what you want students to be doing, then what do teachers need to be doing to set that environment up? How do we help make that happen? And once you've identified what teachers need to be doing in order to support the students, you go back to what do principals and their teams need to be doing to help support the teachers do those behaviors and actions that are going to drive our students at that high, learning at high levels. So I introduced this to you all back in the spring, and then we challenged ourselves to take it to a macro level, right? Because that was just at a campus level, thinking about classrooms. So we're taking it and expanding it to the district level. So if you follow that same philosophy here, so if Board of Trustees do X, then the superintendent will be able to do Y, and that's superintendent and team, right? So that we will realize the vision, mission, and graduate profile. And a lot of the success criteria we have already defined. So starting over on the right, realizing that vision, mission, and graduate profile, that success criteria is defined in that strategic plan. That already has the goals, it has the system response or those strategies of how we're gonna do that. It has the evidence and those key questions, right? So then you all engaged in a process, engaged in a process so that if this is what we want to see in our system, then what does the superintendent need to do to help support and drive those actions and behaviors that are going to realize that vision, mission, and graduate profile? And you all define that in the superintendent evaluation. So that is how you want to hold Dr. Gearing and our team accountable to making sure that we are meeting what we set out in the strategic plan. So then we talked about, so then that last piece, so then the Board of Trustees do X in order to support the superintendent and team in order to realize that vision, mission, and graduate profile. We talked in the spring about board purpose, goals and evaluation, and board meeting agendas, okay? So if you recall, when we engaged in that work, we actually got feedback from you and said, what is it that we need to be spending our time together in this boardroom space talking about if we're really going to move this work and hold ourselves accountable? And you gave us feedback, and we drafted a board meeting planning calendar, which we're going to dig into a little bit more later on in our evening together, but just a reminder of you all informed that board agenda planning calendar. We also spent some time talking about board purpose. So you have a hard copy of this at your spot if you want to pull that out. So we know that there are certain things that are in legislation and policy that you are responsible for, right? But as we think about this team coming together and we go back to that moral imperative and that unity of purpose, we actually asked you, what do you see as your purpose when we come into this space together and you're interacting as a board? And we, of course, used some tools, got your feedback, and that was actually a board retreat last December. So that was over a year ago. And then we took all of your feedback and drafted, again, we had some feedback on that, drafted this purpose statement. And so this was your words. And so we just want to take some time for you to read through that. And again, we want to make sure everyone has a chance to weigh in on this. Is this still what we see as the board purpose? So I'm going to give you just a second to read through that, and then we'll open it up.
When I read this, the one thing that like really sticks out to me is the thing over here that I was like, I don't think you can put students first if you put teachers last. And I feel like it is really critical that we're supporting those life changers. And that when, and I know some people are like, what does life changers mean? I'm like, life changers it's our teachers. It's our it's our diagnosticians, it's our CNS workers, it's our bus drivers, it's our custodians, it's everybody that allows this system to support our students, right? And so when I look at this, I feel like they're missing.
I agree with you, Gloria. That's one thing I keep going back to that question you brought up, like how are we empowering? What does empowering look like? How do we empower our staff? And I do love the board purpose, but I see students' needs, advocate for every student, each and every learner, but where's there about our life changers? How are we empowering them? How do they fit into the picture? Because at the end of the day, the decisions we make do directly impact them. So if we're truly doing good governance work, shouldn't we have our empowered staff somewhere in our board purpose? So I keep thinking about it, so I'm kind of quiet right now because I keep going back. That's really bothering me. Like, what are we doing to empower our staff? Like, it's really making me reflect and start thinking, like, how do we craft that and make sure so our staff know that we are ultimately we're here, right? We're here for them.
Just a quick point of clarification. So we wrestled with the same thing as we were developing the strategic plan. And you'll see some intentionality with that, in that when we talk about students, we use the word students. When we're talking about everyone in the system, we use the word learners, because we really believe that our staff, our administration, everybody are learners. We are a community of learners. And so I don't know whether that was intentional at the point that y'all were writing this, but it has become something that we've been sort of pondering and thinking about. How do we differentiate when we really are talking about students, but learners really are, it's all of us. So I don't know if that helps at all with that, but.
So I like that differentiation and discussion, because I hadn't seen that before in here, so thank you all for pointing that out. Definitely something to consider. I think back to our statute, and kind of when I go back to reading, there are three, like, I would argue, parts of this triangle, right? So you have your students, you have your teachers, and you have your parents. And there's also community. I get that. But I think the three parts that I think that interact most with student learning would be like your teachers, your staff, your students, and your parents or guardians in the community. And I feel like in our core beliefs, that's why we said LISD family, because we didn't want that. And instead, when we just have engaging with the community, I almost feel like we're leaving out that LISD family, to your point, I mean, so I think there's, when you're talking about if we want to unleash the potential, and if we're saying learner means if we want to unleash the potential of our teachers and our students, then I would say what the things the Board of Trustees are saying we feel like we need to do when I listen to our meetings is that engaging with our LISD family. We've talked about our teachers, we've talked about parents, we've talked about our students, hearing from them more. And so I feel like just community leaves that out a little bit.
I like what you said about the LISD family, because that includes community, but it includes so much more. And I feel like that's missing.
I also have a question about student success. And, we kept coming back to this. When I go back to core beliefs, we don't use the word student success. We talk about maximum potential. We talk about optimizing individual outcomes or personal growth. If we want to go to our vision and mission, we talk about cultivating. I mean, I see different areas where we've utilized some description of what we want to do, but it just doesn't seem to be echoed in our board purpose in that last part.
I get the strange feeling there's a tool coming.
So of course there's a tool coming. There's sticky notes. I have hot dots. We've got tools, right? But not. But Not for this part. So we wanted to get your feedback. So what I would propose, and definitely still open to other feedback, is that we can take.
But if something happens, just motion or something and we'll have a break. Second thing is optimizing the system. That phrase, something really resonates with me positively about that, because I keep thinking about, as board members, we don't often interact with a day-to-day or how to make that one thing work for that one student. Kind of that each and every is really up to administration. It is, from a board perspective, how are we addressing the system as a whole? How do we have that opportunity for empowering our teachers and success, and to be able to, I guess, unleash their potential to be able to address each and every need? So something in there resonates with me. I don't know if it sounds cold, because we're talking about our LISD family, but I really think when you're looking at what board work is, that's the thing we're looking at, is overall, how is the system working? Are we financially stable? Do we have the workforce that we need? How are we supporting our staff and our teachers? So,
I just wanted to add that off of what Gloria said, because as somebody who was not involved in this process at all, the absence of, trusting and empowering our educators was very glaring. Because I don't have, the background of what learner means. I don't have the background of how you all came to that. And I really would love to see that added also, because nobody here can do our jobs if we're not doing those things.
I really like what you said, Trish, about the part where it says optimizing the system. That also reminds us as a board to not get in the weeds, stay in the balcony. That's our job. Our job is policy. Our job isn't the day-to-day. Our job isn't to run anybody's classroom. Our job isn't to, our job isn't to, buy books for libraries. That's not our deal. Our deal is policy. And so I think that optimizing the system, how do we keep it whole? How do we keep it appropriate? How do we keep it, all of those things? That's our job. I like that.
All right, so we're going to take all of that and we're going to make some edits, and then some magic. I heard we're going to make some magic. Okay. And then we will share that back out with you. Okay, so we're going to keep moving because, yes, of course, we have a tool. Okay. And then you get a break, I promise. Okay, so again, I'm going to go back to this. We're building out the theory of action, right? So we're pretty close on that board purpose, which will drive the board goals and board evaluation. I know that's been part of the conversations that y'all have had over a number of years of wanting to really make sure we have a solid foundation for that. So as you think about this theory of action, board purpose, everything we've been talking about tonight, then the question we have for you, so what are the most important board actions and behaviors that will support and drive these efforts? And yes, you have sticky notes. And yes, we're going to do an affinity. So this is going to be one board action or behavior per sticky note. So as you think, pull it all out, pull out everything. And as you think about that, what are the most important board actions that will support and drive these efforts? For instance, advocacy work, right? Advocating at the state level, right? That is huge. That is a huge board action that is important for what we're trying to do here in LISD, okay? So one idea per sticky note. You can, no, you can have as many sticky notes as you want. But I'm going to challenge
one
you.
idea per sticky note.
Yes, one idea.
You can have a lot of words, but one idea.
One idea, and I want you to think about the most important, because we are going to narrow. 2 more minutes. Okay, Sarah's going to come around and start collecting your sticky notes. We are going to go ahead and pause and let you take a break. And during the break, we're going to affinity those and see what themes emerge.
All right, board members, it's 7:34, and we are getting ready to go back, or no, we are back in open session. We're not getting ready, we're right here. And I thought we were going over to the wall, but I think we're gonna, oh, okay, we're moving over to the wall to do some discussion.
All right. You were on a roll. Members. You're a part of the team. All right. Can we have the slide deck back up? Okay. People get right. I didn't know me here. Okay, so we started working through the affinity, and this is why you had the participants do the affinity, because there were things that you meant in the sticky notes that we don't necessarily know. So I'm gonna go back to the question, what are the most important board actions and behaviors? And so as we were looking at this, one prime example were all of these sticky notes that were all about advocating. So advocate for students. For a district, it just says advocate, right? So that is a board action.
Was that because you called it out?
Possibly, yes. But that is it. That is a great example of a board action or behavior. So one of the sticky notes that we had over here was safety and security. It's not necessarily a board action or behavior unless there was something more to that.
So can you visit maybe a little bit about theory of action and why that flow doesn't work necessarily or does work for advocacy? Does that make sense?
All right, so let's take that thread through. So if the team of 8, if the board is advocating, right, at the state level, at the local level, for things that are going to impact LISD, right, how does that then support the superintendent and team?
I think maybe then my safety and security, then really it was more of a create a policy that, so. That ensures safety and security, so I just didn't write all the words.
Okay.
Sorry. I'm not on my, whatever, I'm allowed to
No,
talk.
and I think
I'm allowed to talk.
there are items in here where I was thinking, I went to school board framework from SBOE-TEA, where they're thinking about what is it that boards need to do, and so I have some things in there, and I also have some things in there that we've been working on that may be in our strategic plan, right? But are those, and so that's what I'm trying to do is make sure I understand, are those a theory of action for change? Is it like the thing I think is like key, that if we unlock and do this or focus on this as a board, when we have our board evaluation, when we go back, if we have like 7 or 8 goals, that's a lot. But if we say, okay, we as a board said if we focused on these things, we would empower the superintendent and the staff, which empowers, that's, right.
Yes.
And so I think advocacy makes sense. I wonder if policy, because I'm struggling with policy a bit, because I think policy is kind of like a natural, like breathing thing. We need to work on policy, but we haven't been able to work on policy to the depth that we've talked about as a board, that we've been getting ready and we haven't done it. We've gotten ready, but we're getting closer. I was wondering if that might be a theory of action for change, because if we clean up our policy and get our vision in there, then that empowers our superintendent, which then empowers him to do. Does that work?
Yes.
Because it's all related when we were talking about board operating procedures and how they're all like.
Sorry,
I hate these. Y'all really gonna give me a mic? No, but
it's for the community.
Yes. When we were working on our board operating procedures, you see a lot of, when we were discussing certain things, how policy truly ties into our board operating procedures and how they both kind of align with each other, but not really. And I think you're right, Trish, because at the end of the day, like, we look to our board operating procedures, the board operating procedures have the policies, and so how do we, just like you said.
So where does operating procedures or norms then? How do we see that in the end? Do we see that as being something that's like breathing, like we're regularly doing it? Or do we see something in there as a main, like a board purpose that empowers the superintendent and empowers the district? Team of 8, you're also there. Bruce, what do you think?
Wait, can you say that again?
The operating procedures, the norms that we're working on, like how we're going to interact. Let's say in 6, 8 months, a year, we're going to look and say, hey, board, we had a purpose and there were these things we wanted to accomplish to really see some change in the district. Would norms and board operating procedure be that? Or would there be, I don't know, it seems like that's more of a checklist than an actual, the other items.
I'd like to broaden that to say that norms and operating procedures impact meetings.
Right.
And effective meetings are really important to get the job done.
Right.
Right? So for me, there would be a heading of, I wonder if good governance is too broad?
It is too broad.
If effective board meetings are, and part of effective board meetings is your annual board agenda planning calendar. And what do you do in board meetings? How do you spend your time? One of the things that EISO advocates for is how long do you spend talking about instruction and outcomes?
Well, it says focusing on the right work somewhere up there as well.
Yeah, in board meetings.
Exactly.
Is that board meetings?
Yeah, there you go. And that's, what was it, in our board operating procedures, we changed it to effective governance. And it was board work, but no, it's effective governance.
I was so into what you were saying that I was like, just holding it like a lollipop. You keep it. You're better at
Okay,
it than I am.
so I added the header of conduct effective board meetings.
And so
Okay.
I moved mine under that. I didn't move anybody else's, but I moved approved budget or agreed accountability measures and outcomes. So to me, those would be items that would be in a good meeting.
Could we also include the budget stuff too? The budget and
Like management oversight, all of that go into, right?
So for me, budget feels different.
Okay.
Because it's almost provision of adequate resources allows the team to do the work. But that's for me, a major theme, not yes, it's accomplished in board meetings, but that's.
What about oversight, management, oversight of systems, oversight of systems? Does that go into the meeting?
under good governance?
We don't have a good governance, do
Well,
we?
just with those.
I think good
going with
governance
those,
needs to be
going
over
with
there.
those stickies.
I think good governance is just stay over there.
So I think too, going back to that policy discussion, is that when we revise policy to support the work, what that also does is that also it ties in with the conduct effective board meetings, because if we have good policy and stuff happens, we go, wait, we have a policy for that. And then we're like,
Bingo.
we're moving forward instead of getting stuck in the weeds and talking about the same things over and over again.
I was just going to say that if we're using the policy to inform everything else that we're doing, it allows us to stay in our lane and out of the weeds in order to have effective board meetings. So we're not concentrating in meetings on stuff that isn't our board responsibility.
I see lots of pointing, so tell me
So
what we're doing.
the management oversight and oversight of systems, is that basically what they've been discussing, or is that something else?
Is that the stay in your lane?
Yeah, the
Yeah.
policy.
So that goes under effective board meetings, right? The stay in your lane and stay out of the weeds, or is that a different thing?
That's how do you put that in the theory of action?
Is management oversight a theory of an, right?
Governance.
Right, is that just what we are? I'm just trying to figure out
Good
the
governance is
difference.
such a broad
Right,
thing that
right.
it could mean anything. But management oversight of major business systems is your internal audit.
Your budget.
You're paying attention and you're looking for signals that something's gone wrong in the system. And then you're asking questions, right? So what happened? Why is it like that? Our policy says X, but I see Y. You know, the outcome here is not as it should be. What are you doing about it? But you're not saying, do this, do that.
Right.
So Dr.
That's for me
Gehring,
what management oversight is.
then that everybody's nodding their head and saying, yes, they like it. How do we title that? Because I think that would be a theory of action.
That one says audit. What would they?
Well, we can put it with management, you can put audit with management. And approved budget then would be management oversight?
We'll have to talk about that more. Anna?
Let me try to formulate the words, because I know where you're going with this, because I've tested this myself. That's what I'll say. Give me a second.
Well, and to the point, if we're going to say budget separate, I'm just looking in my head as we're thinking about board, how are we saying, you know, are we doing our job well? The more goals you pick, the longer it'll be, and we're already at 3, so.
So I think I do agree that budget can come under management oversight of major business systems as finance.
Mhm.
I think
Okay.
I might agree. Management oversight.
There you go.
Just
Yep.
management oversight.
Because it's a little more broad, but includes
Right.
all of that
All of the
So
stuff
then
that,
wouldn't that
then our
include, if
lane.
it's management oversight, then hold the superintendent accountable and.
evaluation.
Yep.
All of that, those three.
I would say evaluations management oversight.
Yeah.
Well, that would kind of
Yeah.
almost be with.
I haven't seen it anywhere yet, so, but it's just, oh, community, right there, in the middle.
Yeah.
All right.
Relationships.
So I see 4 really good things. Tell me about what's left, Sarah, from your, and do we need to put them in there?
Gloria just pointed out this column right here, which is a lot about listening to stakeholders. So we have our LISD family, listening to students, listening to staff. So that seems to be a pretty prominent.
I like listening.
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 Or listening to stakeholders.
Okay.
What's the last one? Goals or-
So right here we have good governance, stay out of the weeds, stay in your lane, think outside the box.
That's kind of management oversight,
right? Yeah.
But I think that's all.
Feel like all of that
whole
goes over there?
over.
Yes?
Yep.
Good. I don't want to move a sticky without approval.
Think outside the box.
Well, we've got this one, stay focused on. It's in our board norms, and this is the, hopefully.
Goals can go under alignment with vision, management oversight.
What about stay focused on students, educators? Probably.
Management
I-
oversight,
I-
listening.
I
But we
wonder,
don't really.
you talked a lot earlier about supporting our life changers, and I'm not sure if that
Is that
doesn't need to come out here
Well,
somewhere, or
see,
where
I
does that
wrote-
fit? Advocate?
Well, when, creating policy, right here, this is creating policy that empowers our staff. So as we talked about, how do we empower our life changers as a board, I think in my job, it's, part of it is listening, part of it is advocating at the Capitol, right? At a state level for advocating for traditional public education. And then the other piece is creating policy locally that demonstrates that. And so I don't know if this is the management or if this goes under advocate, or I guess this is just revised policy, I mean, it's specific to policy. But a lot of these that are here, yeah, like this one is advocating for policy supporting traditional public education at the Capitol. And so those are all those pieces, I feel, of when we talked about how do we support our staff. I think it comes across in all of these places, right? Because we have to do it here so we can pay them, and that there's state policy to support them. And then we have to create policy that shows that. We also have to listen to them, right? And we have to conduct effective board meetings so that we're communicating that we're responsive to that
I'd love to
information.
see a thread, like a bar across the top
Yeah.
or something that says explicitly, we're supporting our life changes in every one of these areas.
Yes.
But it explicitly says that, because I think they need to hear that.
And I want to, and when I look at that bar visually, it's, okay, we're listening to them, right? We're advocating for them. We're revising policy. We're conducting effect. So it is this line going across.
So
And
what
our
we're
students
gonna,
part of that line too?
There at the bottom.
foundation.
The
of it all.
foundation of it.
But supporting students, because
Yeah.
you all have that in that center part that you're going to focus on and listen to.
Right, oh, definitely. I feel like they're the foundation.
I kind of like that supporting staff, life changes along the top and supporting students along the bottom, that they see that everything, it's like a sandwich.
Yeah. So,
Trust the process.
so, I know, right? Trust the process. We know this, don't we? We know this. Okay, I know, right? We self-corrected. All right, so what we are going to do as we continue working through this, I don't want to stop the conversation, but just so you know, we're going to keep all of this because there is so much detail in these sticky notes. And so we're going to capture that, right? And we'll put it in a document. That way we have the supporting life changers at the top and the students at the bottom, so that we are making sure that we keep all of that in the forefront as we go through this work.
Well, I'm curious for the board too, because I love this because I see, we write policy, most of our policy that we're working on impacts life changers and students. Doesn't really impact parents. We don't really write a policy very often that says, and parents, you need to do X, Y, Z. A lot of it is how parents have the ability to reach their students and get their information or talk to their life changers. And we have parent responsibilities in the Texas Code. But my question is, when you do that though, and we have this, we have listening to students and teachers and family engagement, how do we properly let our parents and our guardians know they're part of this? But our policies, when you think about a lot of our board work, is about, they're naturally empowered if we do those two things right? If teachers are doing, are they empowered and they're able to reach out and communicate and they have the time to reach out and communicate. We heard about transition years. We talked about that. When kids go through transitions, do parents know about the transitions? Well, if our life changers are supported and they have the ability to do that and do that communication, our students also know they can talk with their parents about it. Like, I'm just curious, where does our parent and family go in this?
So under listening to stakeholders, we have family engagement, listening to our community, listening and responding to all stakeholders that build trust, all of those things. I think that we have to be careful, though, is that we're LISD Board of Trustees and we have a responsibility to the teachers and the students. Inherently, that we're not, I think they're the ones that are in our system, right? The parents don't go to school every day, the kids do. The teachers go to school every day, things like that. So I think you're right. I think if it's the thread that runs across the top and the thread that runs across the bottom, that the parents are in the middle of all of this. I mean, I really feel like, by advocating for their students, we're supporting public education, which means they get to send their kids to school. So I think it's all tied in, but I don't know that they need to be called out specifically in policy. I think it's more of how do we make sure that the policies that we write are supportive of our staff and our kids.
Yeah, well, and I'm a parent, and we're all parents here in this district, and I can tell you when I look at this, I'm like, good. If you take care of the teachers and I know they're happy, and I know my kiddo is happy and my student is well, then I'm good as a parent. I can go to work. Please let my child be happy. Please let my teacher, have a great day. I mean, when I think about the support, just when I was in PTAs and different events, we always wanted to make sure our teachers were taken care of. And there's no better time than the workforce shortage that we're seeing it. We're like, we really need to make sure our staff knows how much they're appreciated. So as a parent, I'm thinking, I absolutely agree with you. You're right. This is the group that's in our system every day. And so I do see them being at those bars. And parents are kind of like, that silent group, the guardians, your silent group that's kind of interwoven in all of this.
I agree with that, because also as a parent, I'm not here every day. So I'm trusting my kids' teachers to make sure that they're okay, and I'm trusting the admin and this board to make sure that their teachers are okay.
I think if we look at this the way we've outlined this with our staff and our students as the foundation of all of this, right? And if we support our staff with the pieces that they need to inspire students, then students are thriving. Students are supported. When students are thriving and they're supported, parents are happy. And I'm like, so I really believe it starts with, we have to empower and support our staff so they can do all the things that we want to do, that we need to do for our students. And I think through this line that we're talking about, drawing through this that connects it all, there is place for parents to join us at every single piece of that. And not only to join us, but welcome, join. I mean, we partner with this. We need to advocate, right? We need to advocate together. In order to listen, we all need to come together to talk this through. So I think every step of the process, we need to be able to bring in parents in order to make sure we're to be most effective.
Yeah, I think that's a mic drop. Thank you.
Excellent.
But I think we do that already. We do. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to add to that, which is making sure that there are just no roadblocks when we talk about empowering the students, the teachers, and then also the parents being partners along, just making sure that there's no roadblocks along the way for any of those to happen.
Okay, so where we have landed is that if the Board of Trustees advocate, revise policy to support the work, listen to stakeholders, conduct effective board meetings, and engage in management oversight, then the superintendent and team will be able to do what we're holding us accountable to in that superintendent evaluation, which will drive all of that work in the strategic plan so that we will realize the vision, mission, and graduate profile. Yes. Okay, so this is what you have just identified, that you want to hold the team of 8 accountable to a team of 7. You have another accountability to, yes, you get all of it, right? Okay. Okay, so we're going to capture all of this in a document. We'll send it back out to you all so that we can just continue to just kind of sit with it a little bit. Okay? All right, awesome.
Okay. So that was a lot of work, actually. And thank you so much for walking through that with us. Board members, thank y'all too. I loved being able to hear us kind of like all talk it out. And so what do we do next?
Not as exciting as that affinity, but definitely a part of evaluating and improving student outcomes. One of the pieces of that is reviewing our state accountability and TEKS. And I will say, I'm going to be looking down. Dr. Gearing mentioned in a meeting, I guess it was last week, that he needed now 2 pair of glasses, one to see distance, one to see things up close. I am joining your club, Dr. Gearing. Okay, so our state assessments include basically 4 assessments that go into our state accountability ratings. We have the STAR, which is in grades 3 through 12. We have the STAR end of course, and that is based on our state's curriculum standards. So we're going to be looking at the specific content that is within each of those assessments at STAR and STAR end of course. For students who have significant cognitive disability, and they may need more extensive support, maybe more direct instruction, and they meet the state's requirements, they are able to take another version of the STAR called the STAR Alternate 2. We also have, in addition to those two assessments, for students who are identified as emergent bilingual, sometimes we reference them as limited English proficient, English learners, we assess those students in TELPAS. And that's really looking at the progress that they are making in acquiring the English language. Again, for those students who have significant cognitive disabilities and meet those state's requirements, the TELPAS alternate is available for those students. So those are the assessments that are going to be feeding the information and the data that we look at within our state accountability. So as you look at this chart, you can see that the STAR is administered in grades 3 through 8. And the STAR end of course is predominantly at our grades 9 through 12, but we do have a system in which many of our students in the middle school also participate in our end of course assessments, specifically like Algebra 1. So you can see that it's all surrounding based on the TEKS. You can see that science and social studies are independent grades only. Science is at the grades 5 and 8, while social studies is at grade 8 only. We had just a couple of years ago, House Bill 4545 was implemented. So if a student does not meet the passing standard on one or more of those assessments, on the STAR assessments, then they have certain intervention hours to be engaged in to help them meet that passing standard at that grade level curriculum. The STAR, we're going to talk a little bit, this is going to actually be a little bit different conversation this evening than we normally would have had, because our STAR is being redesigned for this spring. So just in a couple of months, as we begin that process of STAR assessments, it will feature different pieces within our STAR redesign. So normally the students are very accustomed to seeing multiple choice. This is going to bring in many different aspects to that STAR assessment. And many of those were created because in the real world, and when we just started talking about what do our students, how do they see instruction, how are they assessed on those TEKS, when we look at that, they are not in our normal classrooms. We do not have teachers who are just giving multiple choice assessments. Our students are assessed in many different ways. It may be honestly just by a 5 little question, maybe it's an exit ticket even in that classroom in how those students are being assessed on that concept for the day. So when they had a group of, including teachers, that were involved in redesigning this STAR, it was really trying to bring in the different aspects of what a student may be seeing in the regular classroom on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. So some of those things are going to, they will have still some multiple choice, but they're also going to have things where they drag and drop, they may have drop-down menus, they may have short and extended responses to construct through in their writing, because the writing is now going to be a part of that RLA, of the Reading Language Arts component. And so we have been conducting information and discussion groups around what does that look like for our students, what does that look like for our teachers, and so we've been having great conversations with teachers, with campus leaders and instructional coaches at each level to ensure that they have familiarity and understand what their students will be facing here in just a couple of months. So those assessments that we just discussed feed actually our state accountability system. So normally, like I said, we would be diving a little deeper, but this is a big change for us as well this year. So in addition to the STAR being redesigned, we have our state accountability system, which is also being redesigned. and it is in the process. So sometimes we think of it as we're playing the game right now, we're playing the football game, but the rules of that football game may change by the time we in that game. So we will be giving you more information as we go through that process, and little bits and pieces are coming out. More and more will be coming out this spring. So that will be a complete change. Now, normally we would be looking at our state accountability in each year in August. This year they are stating that it will come out probably in September of this year, so it'll be just a little bit later. So as we look at our current accountability system, which we have up there, we have 3 domains. Those 3 domains at this point are remaining within the new accountability system. So domain 1 is really focused on student achievement. It's looking at our performance on our state assessments, which we just discussed a couple slides ago, our college and career readiness, as well as our graduation rate. Domain 2 is looking at student growth, school progress, so it's looking at the academic growth, and so that doesn't start until grade 4 because you have to have 2 years of that comparison. I will tell you right now, they are looking at making some changes to how do we really acknowledge the growth of students that still may not be meeting that passing standard, but how are we giving, but have made certainly some great strides in improvement, and so they're really looking at how restructuring that point system to really acknowledge that and give those students points for that. And then domain 3 is part of our federal requirement, and that's really looking at closing the gaps within our student groups. This is probably where we're seeing most of the projected change to come, is in domain 3. We are looking at, we have right now 14 different student groups that we look at in our current accountability system, and that is projected to go down to 6. And there will be some definite changes. So earlier, Sarah Martinez was talking about learners, right? And how we define learners, there are student learners, there's adult learners. Well, right at this, we are all going to be adult learners for this. It is a change, but like I said, we are taking it step by step. And we are also here, we're also keeping our campuses abreast of some of the changes that will be coming. So look forward to more information as we share information in weekly board memos and such as this unfolds.
As you share that information, board members, as we're advocating, and we'll be advocating, of course, for our legislative priorities, but as we work towards that education, we get asked questions about these domains. Any information that you can supply to help us with that advocacy lens would be greatly appreciated.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I have a quick question. So the last time that it was Star Wars redesigned and the first year was rolled out, it didn't seem to, was that one where it didn't really, I wouldn't say it didn't really count, but they didn't really implement it fully until the following year in terms of the A to F ratings. With these changes, do you know if they're going to do something similar with this first year?
We had some of the very exact same questions, right, as school districts, but they are stating, nope, it is going forward.
Yeah, and I'll say I'm on Commissioner's Cabinet, and we have had this direct conversation with Commissioner Morath, and he's been very clear about the fact that there is no grace.
You see our 5 focus areas from the strategic plan down the left, including the student learning and empowered staff and so forth that we just discussed. And you can see that the state accountability, which is really a summative measures, are included in empowered student learning and in the equitable access portions. But it does not, and it's a great report, but it does not address some of the other 3 areas that really, coming back to the hopes and dreams that we talked about and what is it our community really wants for their students, and what do they want us to really to pay attention to and hold ourselves accountable to. Those fall into that empowered staff, the family engagement, and that safe and innovative learning environment. So through the process that Dr. Martinez talked about earlier, and she led you through that timeline so very well, is what are those other measures that we want to hold ourselves accountable to and we want to look at as possible leading measures when we look at the progress monitoring? How are we using different aspects of student learning and progress beyond just a state accountability? And so you will see that in the right column for our community-based accountability, we have the MAP as one of our universal screeners. We have elective participation. We have surveys and things like that that we are also utilizing to determine our progress and to help direct and guide our needs. So Dr. Martinez and I have had the pleasure of working with a community-based accountability steering committee as well to help determine what are our next steps. What is, when we released our first CBAS report this past year, is now what? What does that, how did that go? What is the feedback from that report? What are the things that we may need to look at a little differently? And so this spring, we're absolutely engaging with our steering committee with that feedback from parents, from some staff, and honestly from some students as to what may we need to do next. And one of those things, I'll give you an example, is really looking at some of those survey questions and maybe determining how do we better make those connect with each of those groups. So, as we look at, when Dr. Arterberry talked about our progress monitoring practices, we are looking at just what I talked about. We certainly don't wait just for the state accountability report, but we're looking at many different measures to determine progress monitoring. The state has asked us to specifically look at populations that are students with disabilities and emergent bilingual students. So when we look at that for our district, you can see that we have, based on our PEIMS report from 22, we have our LISD is at 10% for our English emergent bilingual students, English learners, 13% for our students with disabilities and served in special education, and 10% for students served through Section 504. So, if we're going to think about how do we support student outcomes, we need to really understand some very basic principles of each of these student populations. So when we think about our students who are served in special education, it's really understanding what FAPE, or that free appropriate public education, is. It's basically that cornerstone, cornerpost of IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And basically it states that each student or each eligible child with a disability is entitled to a free and public, appropriate public education. It's really looking at those student needs and how do we design that education to meet those student needs to help prepare that child for the future, whether that be in school, whether that be in employment, and so forth. We must ensure that there is a free and public education to all students with disabilities and implement IDEA. So, a part of that IDEA is really understanding child find. So to identify those students who may need those services and being served through special education, we focus on child find, and we must identify, locate, and evaluate all students who may be in need of special education services. So all children ages birth to 21. So that evaluation provides information to assist us in determining, number one, does the student have a disability? And if so, what is the specially designed instruction that may need to occur to help this student succeed? And then what is the need for the evidence-based interventions for this student, and how do we determine and how are we going to look at that student's progress over time and make any adjustments needed to help that student succeed? So, and we have included a link as well to that child find and evaluation. Okay. So one of the other pieces that we want to look at is that least restrictive environment, or we call it the LRE. So basically, as you see here, the goal of that is to the maximum extent possible that we, children with disabilities are educated with children who are not disabled. So we are looking at different placement options, instructional settings. One of those being mainstream, where they are included in the general education classroom, resource in which those students are sitting with the general education students for 50%, less than 50% of the day. Self-contained is the same, but it's more than 50% in a self-contained classroom, or homebound, in which they're actually homebound or in a residential facility. And our second group that we want to talk about, our student population this evening, is serving our emergent bilingual students. So here, when a student comes into our system, we are determining if they mark that there's a other than English on their parent survey coming in. The student will go through a process, an assessment within those first 4 weeks of being enrolled in our system. And through that assessment, we are determining their proficiency of the English language. So during that time, we look at and we say, okay, if they do qualify, and we do determine that they are an emergent bilingual student, that is when we start determining what are their needs, how do we help them acquire the English language, and we have the LPAC committee that does that. So when we look at the TEKS here in the ELPS, the English Language Proficiency Standards, that is what's tested on TELPAS, and that really helps us determine that progress of that student's English language development. That then in turn, because we want them, remember in the beginning I said these students take STAR and they take TELPAS, right? And so what we're wanting them to do is we want them to become very familiar and acquire the English language, because in turn they are then looking at the TEKS, and they are going to be able to show their progress on those TEKS on the STAR test. So the two go hand in hand. Any questions? Like I said, a little different because we didn't have to go in depth this evening with the STAR or the state accountability, as like I said, we're going to be adult learners throughout that process.
And as you know, Brenda will be bringing back more information. We have the TAPR coming up in February, is that right? So she'll be bringing you all of those details. And again, as we get information from the state, we will gladly share it. As Brenda said, we are learning every day as we go. So really kind of what we want to do right now is just really talk about what we've done over the last couple of hours. And so when we came together tonight, we talked about the intentionality with which this board has led through this work and how it's so perfectly aligned with this required EISO training. And I really hope you saw that tonight. Everything that you have done with Sarah and Bruce, everything, the theory of action, the affinity, it's the exact work that we want the boards to be able to do. And so again, I just want to commend you for this and just thank you for your service to our district. I think the last part of this training is really just looking at those progress monitoring practices, right? You've said now these areas that if you as a board do this, then Dr. Gehring and his team will be able to do this so that we will be able to see everything that you have written out in your vision, mission, and core beliefs and graduate profile fulfilled. So what we want to do now, and Anna, I want to thank you because last week you put a nice plug in during the board meeting, and I don't even think you knew you did it, where you talked about the board agenda planning calendar and the importance of this document. And so again, I really want, you have this at your tables in front of you. Just take a minute to look at this. We have a small snippet of it on the screen right now for anybody watching at home. But really, this is just another accountability tool that we're using to make sure that we are designing those board agendas and those board meetings so that you can live out your board purpose. And we're bringing you regular progress monitoring. You've seen us this year come through the formative reviews. You saw Christina and Matt present. You saw Matt and Angela. Next week we have Dwayne and Krista coming. So we're going to be bringing those regular formative reviews. Sarah and Sarah brought you the first leading measures update, right? And again, it's the intentionality with which everything is connected together, and it's all aligned back to the core beliefs, the vision, the mission, the graduate profile, the strategic plan, the superintendent evaluation, and then ultimately holding ourselves accountable through the community-based accountability system. So just want to take a second to let you look at this document. I see one light on, but just curious, how is this document working? Have you seen it in other places work better? Is there things that we need to look at as we continue to modify this? And we honestly are figuring out how we use this internally as well still. We had that conversation today in a meeting. How do we best use this document? So I'm going to pause right there. And Trish, I see your light on.
Sure, and I can answer those other ones. I want to let board take a crack at it first, but I have a question on reading it. On February, back page, it says teacher voice, teacher council input, which sounds like exactly like what some of us have been talking about in the board. It's coming up in February, but it's gray and it doesn't have a person responsible. So I'm going to use this as an example. Help me understand what that means.
So that was some early brainstorming that we had, was we were looking at what would be the things that you all would want to hear, and that's something that hasn't happened yet. So that's why it's grayed out now, but we didn't just take it off because it is something that we want to be able to come back and revisit.
Thank you for bringing that up. I'll say that today in Cabinet, we actually talked about the importance of staff voice and through some pulse surveys that we're actually doing. And so we administered a pulse survey in November and then another one in January to staff. And we actually sat down this morning in Cabinet and went through that and talked about the feedback that we received from staff members. So while it may not have been exactly a teacher council, I can tell you that we're continuing to iterate and how do we continually collect that voice. And so, but thank you for helping us continue to think through how do we get that. I think, Sade, you mentioned earlier the student spotlights, right? Having 4 points here last week and how even through that, being able to show how that teacher brought his passion forward and connected to students. So those are even intentionally built in here. I know Sarah and her team work closely with those principals to make sure that the message they're sharing in the board meetings is also aligned to that focus area.
I'll be honest, when I started flipping through here, I was looking for long-range planning. Shocking. But what I will say, I do appreciate it because right now I feel like with 2 new board members doing the committee and also with the discussion, whether it's an internal board committee or an administration committee, I do appreciate that y'all kind of left it, I don't want to say blank, but I love the idea how it's going to be organically kind of grown into what is going to be best for our district and based on the CFAC presentation. So I love this.
Yeah, I have gone and used this. In fact, I think I've asked maybe you questions and said, hey, wasn't this on the list? Why is it not on the agenda for agenda review? So I found that helpful to kind of know where we are. I think this helps the board also plan kind of expectations of where discussions will land. So I think there is some value here. I do wonder as we continue to do reiteration and we start getting more aligned with what board purpose is and our strategic plan, Is this still doing the job that we want it to do? And I think, you know, one place I might want to ask that, and there's a few, is I do see some teacher voice coming out, and that's really important. I'd like to know how we can emphasize that. It's been very clear through this whole board discussion is we want to make sure our staff is supported and empowered. I think I've heard that at least 3 different times from every single trustee on here, just through tonight's meeting. So how do we see that in our meeting clear, come through loud and clear, where there's that clear connection of we are listening and hearing and able to empower our teachers and staff. The other thing I have a question about is, you know, when COVID occurred, we had our superintendent give us updates, and there were COVID updates. And then the COVID updates kind of morphed into Dr. Gearing's more about laying that groundwork of his vision and next steps. I'm curious because the other day I was almost like, oh, I don't know if we still need your superintendent updates, but they do come in handy. But you'll see they're on every single meeting where we have student staff spotlights, which I believe is different from our campus spotlights. I mean, the student staff is the superintendent report. Is there anything as a board that you think needs to be in that superintendent report that you're missing, or that is in there that you would have rather have had in a Friday memo?
I like the way they are because I think it gives the community a chance to see what Bruce is thinking and Bruce's perspective on it. And it's kind of his time to be able to be like, this is what I'm highlighting in the district, you know, and there's certain topics, like we got the update for the winter storm. I think I don't want to put limitations on that because I think it needs to come from Bruce, and I think Bruce has done a good job at kind of giving us what he knows his board. And I think the moment we start telling Bruce, hey, we need this, this, and this, is the moment that it's going to lose what the whole purpose of it is, to truly get a glimpse into what our superintendent is doing.
I was going to say, I also wanted to go back to the December board retreat where you took time to look at all of the agendas on the wall, right? And you had a lot of conversations about the work that you had done. That was another aha for me that there's a direct connection here, right? So that was all of the work that you had done over the last year and looking at how you set those board agendas and what conversations are you happening. And so I would encourage you as you go forward into the next year and you're working on this, are they aligned to those areas over there, right? Obviously, there's some things that are compliance that we just have to present, but sometimes we may could handle that information just through different means. So just something I appreciated that conversation that you all had and looking back over the last year of how you spent time in board meetings, and so just wanted to make that connection as well.
So I think the purpose of us developing this board agenda planning calendar was to make sure that the board is doing the right work in the meetings because of the theory of action, right? And so this has been a very difficult document to manage over time, because at first it was just like, this is what we have to do at this time in this month. But the work that you've done and put in here has created, I think, some clarity around what is the important work that has to happen in board meetings. And board meetings, effective board meetings ended up on that list, which is interesting. I think this is part of what drives that. Conversation we had today in this internal staff of board agenda planning meeting for the 26th was that we're making notes on this as we go, but not changing anything, because we want to make sure that cyclically over time that things are showing up where they need to show up, and that only the right things are showing up on here. But some of those will be one-off things that we don't want to take off or add just because of one instance, but that over 2 or 3 years we see, is that in the right spot? And but we're tracking that carefully. And so this is a great foundational document, but it's not the be-all and end-all. It's part of the cyclical process of improvement, I think, over time. But I think it's a very powerful way for the board to take ownership of what is happening in meetings and how do we manage it. Just anecdotally, I would say that since we created this and have started really following it and working on it, I feel like board meetings have become more effective. And the conversations that we're having in board meetings are centering more around the important work that the board has to do, and not sometimes the urgent work that the board feels like it needs to do. Does that make sense?
All right, so we are going to, of course, use a tool. So we've had last one for the night. So we did want to spend some time coming back to, this was a new planning calendar. We just wanted to get a sense of, is this meeting the needs that you have laid out or not? And especially in light of everything that we've been talking about. So our question to you is, to what degree does the new board agenda planning process support the progress monitoring practices of the board? You've been talking about a lot of progress monitoring. State accountability is a part of that, but there's other factors as well. So you have a sticky note, and we're going to ask you on the front is to indicate in increments of 10, right? So 100%, 90%, 80%. You can't do 85, you can't do 75. So has to go on the grid line, right? Actually, we'll stick with that one. Okay, and so on the front is, to what degree do you feel that that this board agenda planning process is working, is meeting the needs to progress monitor? And then on the back, if you have less than 90%, please tell us what would it take to raise that level to 90% or higher. So if you feel like there's something missing, then make sure that you note that. And then we're going to come collect those and create our consensogram.
Wait a second, your mic's not on yet.
It's not.
Oh, there we go. There, okay.
Am I on now? Okay, all right. So you can see we have a good consensus around this process, and definitely some things that maybe we need to tweak. And so we're going to take all of that and see. So I know some people said they wrote on the back. Oh, shorten the history portion of presentations. It adds time, and I prefer big rocks in meetings. So that's good feedback. Okay, so either in meetings or Friday memo, a dashboard tracking link, more info on student progress. So that's great feedback. And then continued focus on what the board needs to do rather than wants to do. All right. So great feedback. And again, we iterate around this process, and so we'll take all of that and see how we just strengthen this moving forward.
All right, so I first of all want to thank Sarah, and Brenda for coming up here and leading us through this. Thank you very much, ladies. Again, the intentionality with which this training, I hope you felt that. It wasn't just a top-down state training that you had to do. It truly was tied to your work. And so if you look back up on the board, what you'll see are the 3 objectives that we put up at the very beginning, and I hope you'll find that we've met those through our time together, talking about board behaviors directly connected to student outcomes, obviously looking at the state accountability system, and TEKS are what we know of the state accountability system today. And then progress monitoring practices, of course, with an emphasis on students with disabilities and emergent bilingual students. And we want to thank you so much for coming tonight. And Madam President, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
All right, board members, that concludes all of our agenda items for this evening. I'd like to thank y'all all for your attention and engagement. Sarah, Brenda, Laura Lynn, and Kimberly back there, thank y'all so much for a really good conversation. You walked us through this quickly, but also efficiently, but intentionally. There was a lot of good discussion. I don't feel like, oh, I wish we had spent more time. I feel like we did just the right amount of time. Therefore, there are no objections, no other agenda items. It is 8:35. This meeting is adjourned.
I gotta go get all the, I think we'll keep the picture.